Welcome to the Layman Seminary. Today I've been asked to give a presentation on Jonah concerning Hebrew Discourse from Jonah 1, 4 through 6. That says John, but it's supposed to be Jonah. And I'm doing this after another guy has already talked about it. And so I wanted to try to make it a little bit unique, add some more information in. And, so people are not bored going over the same information. So with that said, we'll begin. Okay, before I get into this is a chart that I've compiled to show the different functions in the Hebrew of the vayiktos, the exkatal, those forms that are used, for the main line, for background, and all of this. And this is a compiled chart from Chisholm's Exegesis to Exposition, as well as his commentary on Judges of Ruth, which, believe it or not, is actually a different list. There's a few variations in that, but it's two parts. So what I did was I made it like this, and then I tried to condense it here so you can see how the rest of it fits on there. But our class also gave us a condensed chart for discourse functions, and so I plan on combining these at some point or mixing them, and see what I come up with. So with that said, we're going into here. So the biblical Hebrew discourse book that we're using, I think it's a Zondervan book. It teaches this method of doing the charts. Now, I'm not very good at PowerPoint, and I forgot how to cover up the PowerPoint slide, and I don't know which video that was taught in. So I'm just going to do it like this and use screenshots and things. So beginning here in 1:4, we see here just as another guy named Scott had pointed out, in verse 3 it talks about Jonah rose, and then you have a disjunctive clause. Of course, a disjunctive clause is where rather than going verb first then subject, you have Yahweh coming right here and then as the subject, and then the action being there. So this can be taken as a but the Lord hurled basically a great wind, or sent a great wind. It could be related to that. In class, they discussed the hiful causative aspect. In other words, the Lord is the one that caused this storm to come about. So here's a list of some of the disjunctive clauses, their functions and stuff. Well, we can see here, of course, in this one right here, they took it as, we take it as contrast. All right. So there's some other options here. This is from Choi. This was also mentioned in the previous thing. And I just want to mention right here that when it says Yahweh hurled a great wind, they're pointing out that not going in the VSO order, verb, subject, object order, is to emphasize on the subject. So Yahweh is being emphasized here. This is at the bottom of Biblical Hebrew Discourse. This talks about the Vav plus exkatal. In other words, the Vav plus the conjunction plus a word, usually a subject or something, plus the perfect form. Initiates a new topic or a new sequence of events or whatever. So not only is it focusing on the Lord, it's introducing him as the character again. Of course, the word of the Lord had came in 1:1, but now we see the focus on him as well here. Okay, they've talked about in class about this word and how it occurs, and God hurled a wind and all of that. So we'll come back to that if it shows up again. Now, this is Logos software. Somebody asked me, because I started doing some screenshots and writing observation sheets, and someone was asking me when I was making an outline, was it based on Bible software? I was like, well, I do have that option, but I was just using, the charts, making the charts myself. So here's an example of the Vayikto. The main lines are blue, the commands are green, the red are perfect, and the participles that are that color right there. The infinitives are not showing up here. I must not have the filter on for those, but so the main lines, the Vayikto clauses carries on the main line of the story. And I made an outline based off of that. I think I put it in the slide. I'd be foolish if I didn't. We'll see. Yeah, I did. So beginning, what I want to do is before I zoom into chapter to 1:4, I want to focus in on what's happened prior to that real quick. So what you see is the word of the Lord comes to Jonah. This is by looking at the Vayiktos. And so this focuses on God's action. This is a commission scene, a commanding scene and where he's expected to follow these commands. But Jonah's actions, as we see, rather than obeying his commission and call, he's disobedient and he rebels. So Jonah goes down to Joppa. Jonah found a ship. Jonah paid the fare. Jonah went down into the ship. So he's going downhill, basically. All right. Now, God's actions, again, this is what we were just talking about. But the Lord hurled or sent a storm, and that's indicated by the eschatos we just mentioned. So in a way, the storm is being commissioned and the storm is obeying because the result clause shows that. And right here, there was a great storm. Okay, then the sailors' actions are mentioned here. The sailors became afraid, which is a proper response whenever you encounter something that is beyond you. The sailors cried out, and I'm not saying they've done everything right. They were crying out to their gods, or depends how you take Elohim there, if I remember right. But what's interesting is that the sailors hurl their cargo or sent their cargo overboard. So you got that commission motif going on there. Jonah's actions are again mentioned here. After focusing on his improper response, it goes into background information. Now, Jonah had gone down below. Jonah had lain down. Jonah had fallen asleep. Then it focuses on the captain's actions, and the captain, of course, represents the authority of the one on the boat, and he's a Gentile. He's not a Jew. And so the captain approaches, and then the captain spoke, and he questions Jonah. So what you see is it's like he's commissioning the commands, and the follower are all together once again. And so the implication is that he's sort of like an unaware agent. I guess you could call him a useful idiot, and God's useful idiot. He's not aware of being used by God, but the text seems to indicate that. So here's what I was just talking about. Right here, God's word to Jonah in 1:2 was arise and go and call against the city or whatever. And then right here, the captain's words are right. Let's see right here. Arise and call to your gods. So he's saying arise and call to your God. Sorry, I said gods. Anyway, so he says to your God. So that's going on right there. So you see this get up commission indicated by cum, and the call out idea is there right there. So this is, I'm thinking maybe observation wise, this might be an inclusio. I'm not sure, just indicating that unit. So putting that together, God's commission to call out is like the captain's commission to call out. By structural implication, the captain as an authority figure is an unaware agent of God. Even though Jonah was disobedient, God was still commissioning and calling him. That seems to, an implication of what's being said here. So when I'm interacting with this, I'm also interacting with the Baylor Handbook on Jonah, which does a lot of stuff with discourse. And so here we are back to our table right here, and we're dealing with the disjunctive here where Jonah rises, but the Lord hurled. We see that already. And then the vayito clause of result or consequences here. And so this is translated, and there was, as a result, a great tempest. So that's the storm obeying. We've already talked about that. Okay, here in 1:4, this is the Baylor Handbook, just talking about the focus shifting aspect of the eschatal, which they're calling topicalization. And then he references Racine, which I also have. That's this book right here, Learning Biblical Hebrew, a new approach using discourse analysis. So I'm working through this as well. But here's the quote from that one. And so it kind of gives you a little translation gloss whenever you're translating. It says, and it was, and then you put the fronted X element who or that in the remainder of the clause. So like right here, they do this. And it was to Adam that he was a sayer. So rather than, and to Adam he said, they would do this just for discourse function, basically, in this particular grammar. But right here is, he says it's used to clarify switch in time or participants of the story. The one word we call for this function is topicalization. Same thing happens in the Greek. The Jonah handbook also pointed out that the repetition of hurl could be an example of diaphora, which basically means the same word is being used, hurled, but it's used slightly in a different way. Some people would call that equivocation, but anyway, it kind of has that irony aspect of things when you're reading it, and it shows that God is providentially behind everything, that God's in control, that Jonah cannot run from God. Okay, so here's some purposes for the mainline clauses. You can pause it and look at those if you want. I'm just gonna just skip on to that. And so when we're discussing here, 1.4c, right there we have a result circumstance, or as Scott pointed out, it could be taken as dramatic. And so as a result, the ship was about to break up. Now this basically means that the ship was breaking apart. It was thinking about it. You have a sort of like a personification here of an inanimate object. So once again, here's the Hebrew disjunctive options that you have. And right here, you have the discussion about the word we translated there was, or and it was. This is the great storm, or in the sea, or whatever. I think tempest is what it was. So right here, it's mentioning that it can function as a transition marker as an ordinary verb, meant to be treated on par with the mainline events. So it's almost treated exactly like the other vayetos. And so it references this right here. I think, yeah, I already put it here. This particular reference grammar. And so the quote from here is talking about Vayihi plus a state of affairs, referred to by means of a nominal clause. So it gives some options here. It introduces the setting of a new scene or episode. It can occur in the setting of a new episode, and it occurs in the course of a scene, or occurs at the conclusion. So a couple options there. But this is the one that Baylor was referring to. It says, Baylor handbook, it says, be treated on par with the mainstream events of the narration. So it's occurring in the course of action. All right. So here we have the boat as a new participant in the story. Maybe whenever I was making my outline of the mainline clauses that I began with at the very beginning, maybe I should have had the ship as an actor, but I didn't focus too much on that. But that's all right. So there's the aspect where I talked about the attribution of human thinking, inanimate object known as prosopia, proso, like person, prosopone, and pia, doing the action of a person. Okay. So here's Baylor's handbook on this. It mentions about the ship here. Onomata, as this is where the word onomatopoeia comes from. Onomatopoeically, attempting to capture the sound of the planks crackling when tortured by raging waters. So this would be hishva to hishver, hishva to hishver. So the rushing water or whatever. And it makes reference to Sassoon, which is in the Anchor Bible about that. And then it goes into the Anchor Yale Bible right here, and it mentions in some of the prophetic books, it mentions in Isaiah about the Tarshish ships were doing this and commanded to howl. So I'll read this transliteration so you can hear it. Helehu aniyot Tarshish. And so it talks about that, and then it talks about some examples where ships were described as dying or having desire. So personification is going on. And what they mention here is that because the story has a hint towards the fabulous or whatever, and I don't know their view on the book of Jonah. I believe Jonah was a historical event, but as far as the genre that it's communicated in, it seems very satirical. but that doesn't mean it's not an actual event. That just means that it's didactic in nature, and it has those narrative thrusts in it. So continuing on, 1.5a, and as a result, the sailors became afraid. There's that result consequence right here. Consequence, so every man cried out to his God. We're going to talk about these in a minute. Here's the Vayikto, sequential action or simultaneous action is an option here. And then, so I took it as then right here. And then they threw the cargo. If it's sequential, would be that. But if it's sometime, it could be like a meanwhile idea, which we'll discuss in a minute. Now, here's the relative clause. Relative clause is a dependent clause. And the discussion was whether to put it on its own. But if these charts are functioning like clausal layouts, then we map out all clauses, independent or dependent. So I could see the rationale for that. And for those that didn't notice, we indent the prepositional phrases underneath as well. So modifying which was in the ship. So I kind of put this in parentheses to kind of indicate, what the relative clause is doing. And I'm wondering about into the sea, if it's, and then they threw the cargo into the sea. This is the completion of that thought right there. All right, so you have an infinitive construct of purpose right here in order to lighten their load. And they talked about in class about how you would want to lighten your load if you were taking on too much water, because ships normally have ballast or whatever at the bottom. So I know this is colorful, but I use these on online social media that whenever I'm reading, whenever I'm studying, I mark it up and I make a meme out of it so that other people could benefit from it and all of that. So right here, what this is talking about is that Jonah is perceived as non-active at first, in this story. I mean, he runs, yes, but then he gets on the ship, he goes down, and now he's asleep. And at first he appears to be identified with the sailors, but as you start seeing, there's a contrast going on. And that's because God viewed Jonah as distinct, as being an Israelite, and as being a prophet of God. So you got this idea that Jonah tried to hide from his call, but God called him out through the captain, the situation. And Jonah is a microcosm of Israel, and Israel is supposed to be distinct among the nations. And rather than representing God, it is the Gentile that calls on him to who are you and all of this, where are you from, and all of that information there. Basically, God is using these Gentiles to call Jonah back to his identity so that he comes back to his sentence, so that he repents. Okay, once again, still messy, but right here, whenever the people are calling out to their gods or whatever, you have that same word going on. So you can put this together. God called Jonah, and God called Jonah and Jonah to call out, but he didn't. So when others call out, in other words, because of their distress, because of Jonah, the problems that he's caused, they're calling out for deliverance to their gods. They have the wrong object, because whenever you have this little bit preaching, I guess, but whenever you have a Christian or believer, because he's an Old Testament saint, whenever you have an Old Testament saint failing to represent God, then the people around you are ignorant about how to address God. And so these people are just going off of what they already know as pagans. Not saying they haven't been exposed to the Jews. I'm just trying to depict what seems to be narrative thrusts in the book. All right, so when others call out, then God, through the captain, calls him into account. And so, I wondered if this is related to God using Gentiles to provoke the Israelite to jealousy, because Jonah is being unfaithful. And so God uses other things as well as the Gentiles to provoke Jonah, in the sense of remembering his identity, remembering his calling, which, that has a whole lot of eschatological implications. Okay, so we continue on right here, and this is where it discusses the relative clause about it being subordinate and all of that, providing background information. We've already talked about that. Yeah, this is we've already talked about that. There's the purpose clause. Here's the eschatological construction again. Moves the narrative off mainline by shifting the focus to the fronted subject of the clause Jonah. Yeah, because in contrast to these sailors who are active, he's passive, and so that's where we're at. Now, Scott translated this as but I think last time, but I wanted to translate it as now to try to bring out the parenthetical aspect of things. I know the options, it's kind of interesting. They mention anterior action, and anterior means front ground, but the others are talking about its background information. So I'm not sure why they use that distinction, but I do think it does have the background of the flashing back effect of reminding us of what Jonah had already did. This is the problem. This is sort of like a problem solution thing, almost like Genesis, when this says now there was no man to till the garden, and Adam was alone and all of that, where God provides a solution for that. The problem is that the prophet is not functioning as he should, and as a result, the background information is just showing him to be a failure. And it's irony that the pagan sailors are more active and taking this more serious, where Jonah is pretty much apathetic, not bothered by his conscience that he's in total rebellion against God. And falling asleep, we have that there. Okay, so narrative discourse. The va plus excatok moves the narrative mainline by shifting the focus to the fronted subject of the clause, thus shifting the focus from that of sailors to that of Jonah. Right. All right. So it's talking about Jonah being marked right here. This is where it used the word anterior construction, and it mentions this grammar right here. But one thing it mentions here is that I know we talk about the pluperfect aspect, how it could be translated, but as this is pointing out, that fails to render the possibility that this is simultaneous action. So what I picture this in my mind with this meanwhile idea, it's sort of like when you're watching a movie and it does the comic book thing where you have two panels and it says meanwhile, and you have the same actions going on at the same time. So one perspective is focusing on the sailors, and another perspective is showing Jonah sleeping. Okay, so this is talking about the fronted subject, the anterior is involved. The construction refers to events that happen relative to temporal secrets in the meanwhile. So background information would be flashing back, but they seem to be saying that anterior, which means foreground, is basically putting it on the same level. I guess the example of the comic or movie is that it's in the same, it's described as the main actions going on at the same time. Like the 24 thing, how they used to do all that stuff, that series. So, okay, let's see here. I don't have this source, but they reference the Nikot for Jonah on, can't remember, about some of that issue. You have to look up what that was. Sorry about that. It's information mentioned on the screen, but I'm just trying to flow through here. Okay, so here we are. We got the narrative main line continuing right here. This is kind of funny that I found out that the Septuagint, in addition to mention he was sleeping, it says he was Kai Ken. They're taking as but he was snoring. So that's kind of comical. One thing that's kind of interesting, and there is similarities to the language where he's talking about sleeping in the boat that's related to Sheol. The chapter 2 is going to be talking about, the experience he had, where he goes into poetic stuff to describe that experience. And so you see that Jonah is close to death. He's under divine discipline, if you will. And the word for deep sleep is associated to being close to death. And this points out that there's 2 times that usually sleep is associated with receiving revelation or being close to death. And so here he is. It says going down, lying down, sleeping. Now I know y'all covered this when y'all studied Jonah in the previous semester, some of this stuff, but I just wanted to liven up things a little bit and to contribute a little bit more. Let's see here. So this is kind of interesting because it's talking about pacing right here. it's talking about the sailors begin with simple clauses that build to longer clauses, indicating greater activity. But Jonah, he becomes more and more passive, in activity. And I think this is sort of like what Corvella talks about, not necessarily the same function of things, but where David was active before the Bathsheba account, and then everything shifts to uh, his passive function, if you will, him not responding correctly and stuff. And so I think something similar is going on. I'm not saying it's occurring based off the same type of discourse or syntactic structure or anything, though. Okay, so here we have him falling asleep. There's the flashbacks. This is where they end too. And so the captain came to him. So this is where the Vayito is resuming the story. All right. And so the captain came to him. All right. And this is what he says. Now, this is just mentioning about the main line, what we just talked about. Here it is again. And they're saying the word said right here is a discourse switching cue to focusing on another type of discourse hortatory, because he's going to exhort him. And so that's what this is talking about right here. The participle that's used there is indicating background activities. And then that's where he starts giving these imperatives and everything. We're not really going into the imperatives and stuff because we were just focused on the Vayiktos and the Exkatos, the discourse structure right now. But we'll come back to that possibly. So this confirms my initial observation when I was reading the text. But of course, it mentions a syndictic construction. In other words, without the conjunctions arise and go. But it's mentioned that these are the words like they're like the first word spoken by Yahweh. And they mention a double entendre because it's arise, and of course he was passive laying down, and all of that. And this is a last mention. This is one of the Hebrew syntax books I have. It's pretty cool. It links to all other ones. I don't know if y'all can see that. It's the same thing with the book in hand. I had that at one of my intermediate. And so I mentioned it to Scott before, when we studied in between classes and everything. But it's a good book for as very easy. I have it on Kindle as well. But it's just very, I don't know if this will let me see it. And this is the bad thing about a background. But it's just very easy to trace the information, so I'd encourage y'all to add that to your library. Well, I guess there'll be some questions and answers, and probably what I'll do is I'll submit this presentation because I can't do it live, but I can probably make the question and answer part live. So anyway, hopefully y'all were blessed by this. God bless, and thanks for the opportunity.